Before Hawaii became the 50th state of the United States of America and a popular tourist hotspot for your average upper middle class American, it was an island full of native Hawaiians, a number that's been whittled down to just 6%. Somehow, out of all the countries angling to become best friends with the Hawaiians, the US won. And over time, they weaseled their way into a position of control over the islands. But to understand how that happened, we gotta go back to the beginning. Around 1500 years ago, some bold Polynesians sailed out about 2,000 miles on board double-hulled voyaging canoes, using only the stars for navigation. This long voyage brought them to Hawaii, but after a few back and forths, the newly settled islands were cut off from southern Polynesia and became isolated for close to 400 years. However, in 1778, Captain James Cook became the first European to make contact with the Hawaiians when he landed at Waimea Bay on the island of Kauai. Cook and his crew were welcomed by the Hawaiians, who were fascinated by the European ships and their use of iron. In fact, it was to the point where his crew would even trade iron nails for sex with locals. But soon after this first meeting, Cook continued on his voyage, only to return a year later. Although, this time things were different. Cook and his crew suspected the Hawaiians had given religious significance to their first meeting, and when they came back, their theories were confirmed. They arrived in the middle of a Hawaiian religious celebration and were treated like gods. For the next month, Cook and his crew exploited the Hawaiians' goodwill, but karma caught up to them, especially from the diseases they brought, which killed a bunch of locals, because it also eventually took one of Cook's men as well. With this death, Hawaiians realized that the Europeans were mortals, and resulting relations became strained. The crew tried to sail out of Hawaii, but rough storms damaged their ships and forced them to return back to the islands. However, upon return, they were greeted by rock-throwing Hawaiians, and eventually the islanders were even able to steal a small European ship. While negotiations with King Kalaniʻapuʻu to return the ship were underway, the situation took an even worse turn when a lesser Hawaiian chief was shot to death by one of Cook's men. Chaos ensued, with the captain and his crew firing on the Hawaiians, but they were quickly overwhelmed and all but a few made it back to the ship. But Captain Cook was not one of them, and in retaliation to his death, the remaining European forces launched cannon and musket fire at the shores, killing about 30 Hawaiians. Following this assault, they fled back to England, only to return years later, but this time with much more caution and a much slower plan. Although, the English were not the only large country which tried to buddy up with the Hawaiian kingdom. Before even Captain Cook, there are some debated reports of Spanish trade ships crossing the Pacific from Mexico to the Philippines, dating all the way back from the 1560s to 1815. Most of these claims come from a potential Hawaii being seen on Spanish maps in the 16th century, and again in 1743. But the evidence isn't concrete. Other countries which contacted Hawaii throughout the rest of their independent reign included France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, and Switzerland. The Hawaiian kingdom entered treaties with many of these nations, and to get this much attention despite their size, clearly everyone knew there was some strategic advantage there. Some of the first to reach treaties included France and Denmark around 1840. After this, the others followed, often with the same goal of trade. However, in the meantime, Hawaiians battled between each other in efforts to reunite their islands. And eventually, the Kamehameha dynasty was able to achieve unification, but not long before the arrival of the first missionaries in 1820. While these missionaries came from all over, the ones that stayed in Hawaii tended to be Americans. Their mission was clear: spread religion throughout the islands, and since the missionaries appeared to bring no threat with that mission, the Hawaiians welcomed them. As part of their objective, they were tasked with locating pivotal communities in the Hawaiian Islands so that they could build regional stations for churches and schools. At first, these were made in traditional Hawaiian thatch structure, but then, later on, they ended up being constructed with wood and stone. This is all part of the missionaries' early on subtle attempts to, in their eyes, civilize the Hawaiians. With the spread of Western religion came the attached spread of Western customs. Hawaiian religious beliefs were forcefully taken over by Christianity, and in the missionary schools they taught reading, writing, and other Western subjects. The missionaries also targeted specific traditions, including pushing for the abandonment of traditional Hawaiian practices like hula dancing, which they viewed as immoral. Another aspect introduced was Western economic practices, which encouraged the adoption of private property and wage labor. This gradually replaced traditional Hawaiian subsistence farming, which was heavily connected to their core beliefs that the land is a shared resource and cannot be subject to ownership. However, as the American missionaries grew their presence on the island, their focus shifted. Before, the goal was seemingly to spread religion, but now that generations of missionaries were born on the islands, things started to change. Their new goal was focused on Hawaii's massive business potential realized by the missionaries, specifically with agriculture. Sugarcane had been grown on the islands for hundreds of years. Even Captain Cook recounted small plot sugarcane cultivation when he first landed on Kauai. While creating a commercially successful operation was no easy feat. In fact, it was tried a few times by Americans with plots reaching up to 100 acres in size, yet they still failed. This was until Peter William Ladd, Allen Brinsmaid, and William Hooper arrived in Honolulu with one goal: establish a business solely focused on trade. They named the business Ladd & Company. Their first venture was the construction of a large stone warehouse and wharf on the waterfront in Honolulu. After this, They leased almost 1,000 acres of land with the purpose of growing sugarcane, and that's exactly what they did. With their success coming on the backs of underpaid Hawaiian workers, they invested more and more, but soon hit a roadblock. Since American presence was still relatively new, Ladd & Company didn't have much swing with local governments. So when countless strikes began popping up at the sugar mills across Hawaii, the businessmen again shifted their goal. What started as the spread of religion turned into a quest for capitalism, and what started as capitalism evolved into plans which sought total government control of the islands. By the end of the 1800s, businessmen who first arrived as missionaries grew influential amounts of wealth across Hawaii, and with this wealth came the need for weapons. Groups under the control of businessmen which looked eerily like militias started appearing everywhere throughout the islands. And even though at this point many white militiamen were born on Hawaii, their allegiance was sworn toward their ancestors' home, which basically meant they were still American. So in the following years, American businessmen made moves posturing towards a Hawaiian takeover. In 1887, the Hawaiian League, a secret cabal of white businessmen, landowners, and missionary descendants, backed by the Honolulu Rifles militia, made their first major move. The Honolulu Rifles had been around for a while, being created and disbanded multiple times. However, when political tensions got tough, affluent white citizens feared what could happen in a crisis, so they once again brought back the rifles. This time though, the conscription of 50 men armed and uniformed with new equipment was funded by an American businessman. The Honolulu Rifles drilled regularly, held target practice, and in general conducted themselves in a military manner, so that when trouble came, they were prepared. This is all while the King's Guard faced severe funding issues which led to a major imbalance in power. But by the time Americans had made their move, the Rifles grew to 200 men, and they forced Hawaiian King Kalakaua to sign a new constitution that sharply reduced his authority. In the following 4 days of unrest, Honolulu riflemen stood guard outside the armory and patrolled streets with bayonets fixed, and each man carrying 50 rounds. A resistance attempted to fight back, but they were chased back on the palace grounds by Honolulu riflemen. Surrender was demanded, but the resistance leader Wilcox and his men refused and began firing on their foes. The riflemen quickly surrounded them, and for the remainder of the day, a shootout commenced. But as night fell and the resistance realized they lost their advantage, a surrender followed. 7 of their men were killed, 0 Honolulu riflemen. This event would later be called the Bayonet Constitution due to the threats of force displayed if turned down. It also shifted much of the king's power to the new cabinet controlled by the Hawaiian League, who were also ironically known as both the Annexation Club and the Committee of Safety. Under strict secrecy and unbeknownst to Kalakaua, the new ministry also invited 2 members of the United States Supreme Court to assist in the preparation of a new constitution. But in 1893, the Americans pushed further for a full-scale overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii. An important thing to note, though, is that 2 years prior, King Kalakaua died with no heirs, and so his position was taken over by his sister, Queen Leleokalani. She would not only be Hawaii's first queen, but also sadly the island's last, as the kingdom was about to change forever. This came with coordination from the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Hawaii, who pushed the scales further by sending American military ships and troops with the intent of intimidation. An American cruiser named the USS Boston, manned with 162 Marines and sailors, arrived in Hawaii, playing an instrumental role in the events that followed. And as soon as this happened, everything changed. Before, the conflict was considered to be internal, as missionary-born whites were technically still Hawaiian. However, when the U.S. officially intervened with their display of military power, the conflict became a complete coup, supported by foreign strength. As part of this act of aggression, the U.S. installed their own leader, Sanford Dole, a major player in the Hawaiian sugar game, whose family name you probably recognize from the grocery store. The true Hawaiian natives resisted this, though, through peaceful protests and petitions which were signed by nearly every adult on the island. And in 1895, they even tried to restore Queen Leleokalani's power, but in the end failed. As a result of their attempt, the queen was arrested, forced to relinquish all future claims to the throne, and put on trial before a military tribunal in her own throne room. A major part of her relinquishing all future claims was to secure pardons for all of her supporters. But the queen was eventually convicted, fined, and sentenced to 5 years in prison and hard labor. However, this was later reduced to imprisonment in an upstairs bedroom of the palace for nearly 8 months, and immediately after this, she was placed under house arrest again for 5 more months. The Hawaii situation grew so contentious that in Washington, D.C., murmurs turned into complex conversations of what needed to be done. Dole himself even made the trip to D.C. in efforts to lobby for complete annexation of Hawaii. Although arguments were not totally one-sided, even some American-based groups pushed anti-annexation sentiment under the basis that the whole thing was just unjust. But any hope for Hawaiian independence took a turn for the worst in 1898, when a President William McKinley-led American administration was sworn in. With this change in leadership, major moves were made, which included Americans taking the next step in conquest and lowering the Hawaiian flag for their own. McKinley, who lobbied Congress to pass the Hawaiian annexation, claimed that it was a necessary war measure. He also claimed the US military would greatly benefit from using Hawaii as a coaling station and naval base in its fight against the Spanish Navy during the Spanish-American War of 1898. This annexation, referred to as the Newlands Resolution and the Organic Act, officially made Hawaii a US territory, but was only the start of what was to come. While the native Hawaiian land was stolen, their culture and way of life still survived. However, since cultural customs were some of the last ties to their old ways, they were subsequently also the Americans' next target. From the start, when missionaries suppressed local religions and changed the Hawaiian code of laws, destruction was always happening. It became the main point of interest to completely destroy Hawaiian culture and recode the island's citizens into a people the US government found more comfortable. As part of this, the Hawaiian language was banned in schools, governments, and businesses, where citizens now were required by law to operate in English. On top of this, sacred sites were disgraced with American development, and the tragic history behind how Hawaii lost its land was scrubbed, then replaced with propaganda. This was all part of a movement which sought to make the US claim of Hawaii seem rightful. The true history of how Hawaii lost its land was often written in the Hawaiian language, which was getting wiped out as well, so even accessing honest documentation became difficult. Then after years of cultural destruction came the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. With this attack bringing the US into World War II, Hawaii became even more important, not only for its agricultural potential, but now again for its strategic location. Immediately after Pearl Harbor, Hawaii was held under martial law, and with 1/3 of the citizens being of Japanese descent, tensions were considerably high. Instantly, US military personnel, along with FBI agents, rounded up all suspected Japanese spies and suspicious persons. Along with this, the Army imposed a strict curfew. Habeas corpus, which basically protects against unlawful detention through the right to trial, was suspended. The military took control of labor, and trial by jury was temporarily abolished. In the first 48 hours, over 2,000 people were arrested, and Hawaii remained under military rule for the next 3 years. Legal historians wrote, the Army's readiness to take over every detail of government in Hawaii only hours after the Pearl Harbor attack was in startling contrast to its lack of military preparedness to deal with the onslaught by Japan's air fleet. As part of this military takeover, every person on the island, with the exception of children, were fingerprinted and issued identification papers that they had to produce on demand. Also, citizens were banned from photographing any coastal locations, and Japanese citizens who were long suspected of lacking loyalty were treated particularly harsh. The worst treatment of which was people of Japanese descent being shipped to internment camps in the mainland United States. But since the US couldn't logistically move and imprison 160,000 people, they pretty much turned the Hawaiian Islands as a whole into one big prison. Japanese-born people couldn't own shortwave radios, gather in groups of more than 10 people, or move without requesting official permission. They were pretty much labeled enemy aliens. The martial law only ended after countless petitions grew in number, but even then, to get some freedom back, the Hawaiians had to give up a bunch of other rights long term. However, years after World War II was over, with Hawaii's further increase in importance being made clear, the US made moves in officially forcing statehood through a 1959 majority vote. Although, this isn't where the story ends, as becoming a state was only a title. In the following years, Hawaiian culture continued to be wiped out with seemingly no hope or any let-up. That was until a slight win when in 1993, Bill Clinton formally signed an apology on behalf of the United States. This was as a means of reconciliation with Native Hawaiians. The document confirmed that the illegal coup occurred with active participation of agents and citizens of the United States. It also further acknowledged that the Native Hawaiian people never directly relinquished claims to their independence as people over their national lands. While the apology cites historic significance of the event, it does not provide federal recognition to Native Hawaiians as other federal laws provide to American Indian tribes. The apology also fuels sentiment of the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, which seeks to rightfully reclaim Hawaii using the inverted flag as their symbol. Due to pressure from groups like this, offers like the Akaka Bill started in 2000 have been proposed, but failed due to their unfair terms. The Akaka Bill included similar benefits to earlier mentioned federal laws provided for American Indian tribes. Some of the major things it left out, though, included not being able to open gaming casinos, not being able to reclaim illegally taken land, and a bunch of other significant changes. So in the end, while major strides have been taken in the process of reinvigorating and preserving Hawaiian culture, the damage caused by American invasion seems irreversible. Nowadays, US tourists outnumber Hawaiians 5-1, and while there are some positive economic benefits, general cost of living for Native Hawaiians has skyrocketed. In 2022, tourist numbers reached 7 million, 2 million of which came from America in the first year of COVID alone. Japan also has relatively high tourism presence in Hawaii, along with other close countries. In the end, Hawaii fell victim to a United States takeover, a fate which many have suffered the same.